Hello, and welcome back to another special edition of the Comics Overtime podcast, Daredevil Born Again, Episode 9 review. My name is Dwayne, and with me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, how's it going?
Hey, really well. It's been a great week of hanging out with comic people and going to a big convention and everything. Got to talk to a bunch of cool artists and people who are involved in making comics, and we come back and watch a pretty interesting episode of television. So, how about you?
Yes, it was uneventful. I did not get to do those things of going to a convention or anything like that, but I did obviously see the finale of season 1 of Daredevil Born Again, which we've got a lot to talk about. This was
really do.
Yeah, the frenetic pace that picked back up again last week seems to have held true through the end of the season. So.
Yeah, it's been an interesting episode to write up the recap on because there were more than a few things that happened. So
yes,
it's quite an episode.
All right. So since February 1st of last year, we've been reading through the comic book history of Daredevil in preparation for the new Disney Plus TV show, not knowing when or even if it would actually premiere. Now, last week we saw Wilson admit to Vanessa to keeping Adam locked up. Matt visited Benjamin Poindexter in prison and inadvertently, at least we think, helped him get the tooth he needed to escape. At the Black and White Ball, Wilson blackmailed New York elites before heading to the dance floor with Vanessa. Murdoch cuts in and confronts her about Foggy's murder, but before she can come clean, Matt takes a bullet from Bullseye meant for Wilson Fisk. At least we think it was meant for Wilson Fisk. Now this week we get the season 1 finale entitled Straight to Hell. We've both seen the episode, and man, there's a lot to talk about. And we need to discuss how this whole season came to an end, because there, as you said, there's a lot of things that got wrapped up, but there is a lot of things that are still very much hanging loose, and we're going to have to wait a while till we get some answers on that.
Yes, indeed. I think that as everybody who's watched it and been listening can see, it is very much the first half of an 18-episode season, with the exception that we only get 9 of them this year. And that leaves us in a little bit of an awkward place when we've got to wait for the next year.
Right. All right, so before we get into the deep discussion, keep in mind this is going to be a spoiler-filled episode talking about the things that happened during that season finale. So if you have not watched the season 1 finale just yet, and you don't want those things spoiled for you, please pause right here and then come back to us once you've seen it. Because, man, Dan's got his work cut out for him in the recap. That's all I'm going to say. All right, let's jump in and talk about it. Episode 9, entitled Straight to Hell, has a 9.2 rating on IMDB. One of the top episodes. I think that ties kind of that high-level rating mark that we saw this season. The Disney blurb, before you jumped into the episode, said Mayor Fisk becomes Mayor Kingpin, and Daredevil is unleashed as chaos takes over the city. And yeah, that is a very, very true assumption as to a very true summation of what happened in this hour of television.
I think that's one of the better tiny blurbs that we've had this season.
So, yes. Yep. It does really encapsulate what we saw in the finale. But Dan, as a level set, give us a little bit more of a recap of what happened during the season 1 finale.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on, but it really did work well together. They didn't have as much just sort of fast cutting back and forth. There were still a lot of cuts between scenes, but we had a lot of scenes that had a chance to breathe. And so really a lot of these things did sort of flow relatively well together, and they gave sort of enough time to a lot of characters I'm surprised how many characters got their moment in this one.
Yeah.
To just get started, remind everybody, if you haven't been out and taken a look on IMDb, this episode again, as Dwayne said, called Straight to Hell. It is directed by Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson. These are the guys who've been directing sort of the bread part of the sandwich episodes.
The bookends of the.
Yep. So they directed episode 1 and then 8 and 9. It was written by Heather Belson and Dario Scardapane. Can't remember exactly. And it starts out actually with a flashback scene showing that Vanessa did indeed organize Bullseye's release in exchange for him agreeing to kill Foggy Nelson. She had her own reasons for this, which we find out about later. We then return to the present at Matt's hospital bed, where he is busy trying to convince Heather and Kirsten of that very fact, that Vanessa is sort of the big bad, the one who was behind Foggy's murder and all the rest. Get back to Fisk's office, and he sends out his task force to get the vigilantes in the city. And in fact, we find him saying that he encourages lethal force in doing so.
Mm-hmm.
He also sends Buck to kill Matt, which classic just Kingpin. I mean, it's somebody who just saved his life. He's like, wouldn't it be great if we now turned him into a martyr for our cause? So
it would be a shame if he succumbed to the injuries that he sustained because he saved me from this vigilante.
Kingpin has no honor. And I think that's one of the things that's interesting and that I like about this show is that, they have the whole he loves his wife or whatever, but he really is just a shit at all levels. There is nothing redeeming about him. He has no sort of respect for anyone else, no sympathy for anybody else, and certainly no loyalty to anybody but himself.
Right.
Sheila is actually there as well. He tells her to purge the staff of anyone who isn't loyal. While she's out doing this errand, she ends up talking to the commissioner, and he confides in her that he is, in fact, going to go to state government in Albany the next day to try and find a way to rein in Fisk, because he's just like, this guy's always been essentially the Kingpin.
Yeah, he says he never stopped being the Kingpin.
He never changed his idea. She says, well, I can't go with you, but you've got my full support if you need something, right? Fisk then causes a blackout by working with somebody from Con Ed, and there ends up being a wave of looting and a bunch of police violence that ensues. During this, Matt finds his way home and sort of evades Buck, who's coming in to try and kill him. And when he gets there, he finds the Punisher waiting. So we find out that Frank has been sent to take care of him. And Frank and Matt then take out an entire anti-vigilante task force squad in very violent fashion and end up jumping out the window just before Matt's apartment explodes after a grenade lands in it. This also takes out any of the remaining cops that were there, presumably. So all of the time that Matt spent trying to convince Frank not to kill all of them went to naught because they all just blow up in a massive fire anyways.
We didn't see bodies, and if I've learned anything from comic books, and we both have seen scenes that we expected somebody to die from injuries being caused, and then they show up just fine the next episode. So
I'm going to go on a limb and say this time these guys don't have enough of a name to be safe. The only one of them we know is one of the ones who was actually alive at the time they left, was the cop who actually killed the White Tiger.
Yes, Cole North.
And the idea was that, Daredevil almost killed him. And Frank's like, yeah, go for it. The Punisher being the Punisher.
Goading him on, yeah.
And then he just shoots somebody else in the room just to show him how to do it or something like this.
Yes.
But, Matt is like, no, not my way. And then, Grenade takes care of it, presentably, or presumably. After that, they kind of fall out the window, land in a car. Karen arrives in a car, the only one in the street, and she goes to drive them away. Matt calls shotgun, and he also notes as he's going, he's like, "You're an asshole, Frank." And the Punisher replies, "Yeah, I know. There's no question that he has self-confidence issues." Does the Punisher? Sure. So back at Frank's lair, then Karen patches up Matt, while the Punisher stitches up his own wounds, which is an interesting sort of juxtaposition of the fact that one of them has a team and one of them has people and the other doesn't have people, you know? During which Daniel Blake is actually blackmailing the city council, and a bunch of bad cops are going around the city killing people, including a kid who is doing some looting. He grabs like a TV, and the cop just shoots him right in the chest, and then pulls his cap down over his eyes so he can say he was a mass vigilante. Essentially, just flat out murder. Matt is now convinced that Foggy was killed when he was for a reason related to his last case, and he and Karen set out to find out what it was. What they find is that Red Hook, where a lot of the activity that Vanessa and Fisk have been doing things, is actually what's called a free port that is not properly a part of New York or even the US, meaning it's essentially its own tax and law-free nation if it's set up properly, a fact that Vanessa was taking advantage of and did not want publicized by Foggy. As things wind down, Frank takes on the Punisher cops in their own lair, ends up being captured. Sheila betrays the commissioner to Fisk, who captures him and then tears his face off in front of his own staff. And after that, the lights come back on. Heather takes a job on Fisk's staff, even as Fisk is declaring martial law under the guise of what he calls a Safe Streets Act. Karen and Matt go looking for an army to fight Fisk with. The Punisher appears to have found a path to freedom from his cell.
That's in the post-credit scene, or the mid-credit scene, I guess.
Nope.
Whichever. We learned that one of the guys watching over the vigilantes or people that he has got caged up isn't very smart. And Anthony, you got to be smarter than that. You got to be smarter than that.
Don't know if Anthony has to worry about being smarter than that anymore.
No, probably not probably.
He's either dead at the Punisher's hand, or the Kingpin's going to kill him when he finds out what happens. So,
yes,
bad day to be that guy.
Yes. All right, so let's jump in, and I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is Frank Castle is back. We've been wondering. We saw him for a little bit in, I think it was the third episode when we saw him.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And there was this really tense conversation between Matt Murdock and Frank Castle, and it was like we'd seen trailers and things that had shown that they were fighting together, and it was like, well, if it doesn't happen this week, I don't know where that footage came from. And but we did finally get that, and it was in Matt's apartment, no less. I do love that they argued like a married couple when he first walks in. Frank asks him if that's his new costume, and calls him Nightgown Man. And then, in a matter of moments, you've got, Matt breaking through the skylight as the anti-vigilante team comes into his apartment, and then Frank jumps in from the balcony, and there's just carnage everywhere. And yes. Even as Matt is beating the snot out of people kind of in his own right, he's not killing them, presumably, but Frank is definitely doing lethal damage, and he's arguing with him about whether or not he should be doing lethal damage while still, while
they're fighting.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I've seen a lot of comments about this on social media. It seems to be that everyone loved the fact that these two tag teamed and took out the anti-vigilante task force, including Cole North, who was the one that was wearing the Punisher vest at the end of the episode that he got shot. Everyone seems to like it. I guess my question to you is, what did you think of it, and did you love the fact that they tag teamed and took out a lot of these cops?
Yeah, I'm glad that Punisher came back again. I like the fact that the sort of Defenders universe has been developed, back in the Netflix days, and I don't want to lose all of these characters. Right. So Frank Castle is a really well-developed part of that universe, especially with Barenthal, who appears to have a fantastic fundamental understanding of who the Punisher is and what he wants to play him as. And what he plays him as, essentially, is somebody so damaged and so nihilistic that the only way he can find any relief from the pain of what's happened to his family and the pain that is his life is sort of that little bit of satisfaction he gets when he kills a bad guy.
Yeah.
Like the violence is at a certain point almost like a release for him. And that it just gets that tiny little bit of satisfaction. And then he's back to being morose again, right?
Yeah.
But partly because of that, this is somebody who truly is like an angel of death. The only thing that makes him happy is killing people.
Yeah.
And he's killing technically the right people. But I mean, when you look at the way he does things, you don't have to be a whole long ways on the other side of the law for him to think that lethal force is acceptable.
Right.
He doesn't go and vet exactly what all these cops have done before he gut shots them and everything. So
cuts their throat, any of those sorts of things.
He is brutal. And the one thing I think was important about this is there was a visceral and violent and truly just like heartless element to the killing that the Punisher does in this, where it is hard to really root for what he's doing.
Right.
He is just awful. These are not fair fights. He's stabbing people who are down through the heart, and he is shooting guys in the head off screen, and he's shooting through walls and the kneecaps at people and stuff like this. This is who the Punisher is, though. That whole idea that he's not a hero. He is batshit crazy.
Which I think makes the scene later on when he goes and confronts or goes into the lair of Red Hook and where all the police are, regrouping. He goes in there, fights a bunch of them, ends up kind of getting taken hostage, and then we see Officer Powell sit down with him and be like, "Hey, man, it's an honor to be talking to you. We would love it if you came and did your thing with us. We all idolize you and all this." And I love the fact that he's like, "You guys are clowns. You are it is circus time in here. I wouldn't if you were on fire, I wouldn't pee on you to put the fire out. That's how terrible you people are. You have no idea what I'm going through or why I do the things I do, yet you're idolizing me." And it reminded me of there was a comic book where some cops wanted to get a picture with him, and he tells them off and is like, you guys don't idolize me. You took an oath to serve and protect. You can't be doing the same thing I'm doing. And I loved the fact they finally started to say some of that stuff in the MCU.
He fully expects the police to be after him and that they should be trying to arrest him.
Right.
The cops he's going to respect are the ones that are trying to take him down because he knows he's a criminal.
Yes.
Right. And it is really well portrayed. Daredevil is also incredibly violent. I mean, those nunchucks are doing some damage. He is. I don't know if he specifically used the hooks to go through people in this episode, but he's whipping those things around and doing some pretty violent stuff. But it is interesting that they are two fundamentally different people with different ideas of how to deal with the fight. That they end up teamed up at all is always weird because their idea of justice is so far from each other.
Right.
But it's kind of that strange bedfellows type of thing. I liked everything about the Punisher in this stuff. I think he was really good in terms of also the fact they tie it into Karen, that she's the one that called him.
Yeah.
And that really, he's got all this pain from losing his family, but you can tell he's got an actual affection for Karen.
Yes.
Right? And her for him, evidently.
Yes.
Right? Which she was in the Punisher miniseries.
Right.
So
yes, they have sort of this weird love triangle thing going on, and they even talk about the fact that when they're searching for the Red Hook information, he's like, "I heard your guys' heartbeats," and presumably they were going a mile a minute when they saw each other adrenaline. Sure, that's what it
Yep.
was. Definitely wasn't because they were excited to see each other.
Yeah. And then there's definitely something there, like, Karen and Matt too. I, 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 I've had it with Heather at this point, just as a note. I don't know. I don't know how
You
that's going to
you you
work,
weren't the only one. I saw some
but
comments are
yeah,
saying, we're through with Heather. Good, just be done with that.
which maybe means it's just a comic accurate portrayal because again, this was your least favorite
Yeah,
character
I
of
did
of the
not like
380 comics of
out of
volume
out
one.
of all the love interests for Matt Murdock across the entire first volume of Daredevil comics. She was the one I disliked the most
So
by a wide margin, I might add.
well played. But I also think that the final scene and the way that the Punisher sort of manipulates and then just breaks that young guy also shows this is somebody who is just brutal and very manipulative. That he can be um it's not a nice guy. It's a really well portrayed character because you can see all the things that make him awful. But
Yeah,
then Barenthal also lays out the pain that makes him that guy so that you still feel for him a little bit.
there is some twinge of empathy when you're like, I know why he's like this, and
Mhm.
it just makes you feel bad every time he does what he does.
No, I think that's what
Yeah,
makes it brilliant and that I respect is that if you are a normal person, I think when you see Barenthal's Punisher, you don't think he's badass and I want to be like him. You think, man,
right.
I'd feel bad for that guy and I would never want to walk a mile in his shoes.
Yes.
You know?
I would never want to show up in an alley with
No.
anywhere near him. Bad times. Right. So we talked a little bit about some of the violence. What were you thinking about some of the violence that we saw in this final episode? It felt like last week when we were talking that it seemed like the violence had sort of ramped up after kind of those original episodes 2 through 7 that were kind of that original creative team. That going back to this other team, it seemed like the violence sort of ramped up last week, kind of kept going at that breakneck speed this week. What did you
Yeah.
think?
And here's the thing, I don't care about the violence. It doesn't turn me on, it doesn't turn me off, right? If it serves the story, great. I think
Sure.
last week a lot of the violence seemed to me to be look what we can get away with on, Disney Plus. We're gonna put a guy's hand in a fryer, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed almost childish to me,
Unnecessary.
unnecessary and juvenile.
Yeah.
And to today, this week, I do not feel that way. Like what you see with Fisk being so angry and so determined to show his power that he actually like cracks somebody's head, or the way that the Punisher fights, some of the brutality of the cops. None of it was played for laughs. None of it was
No.
played just for shock value. It was very much, it seemed to me, organic to what they were trying to do with telling the
Yeah,
story,
in service of the story,
and it
definitely.
wasn't glorified. This is not the torture porn sort of violence. This is the kind of violence I've come to expect from Daredevil, which is essentially that idea that there's always a cost to these sorts of actions. I mean, even with the head splitting thing, I can't imagine there's anybody there who hasn't at least somewhere in them got the idea of going, I'm working for a crazy dude, right?
Yeah.
We are the bad guys because you know your boss doesn't do this at most jobs, right? Um, and so yeah, I'm satisfied that it was appropriately sort of brutal because that's what these guys' fight is.
Yeah. It is. I mean, you don't turn off the power to the entire city with the idea that everybody is just going to sit there and play nice. Bad things are going to happen. And yeah, to your point, I do feel like there was a big difference between violence for the sake of violence last week, but this week it was violence in service of the story they were trying to tell, and to really, really hammer home that Kingpin was Kingpin, and Kingpin is still Kingpin, and he is willing to do all of this and then some to further his agenda, whatever that might be. And it is, and obviously Frank Castle, he's not going to put the kid gloves on just because he's with Daredevil. And he even says, "I'm not going to play patty cake with them when they come in," and he sure as heck did not.
That makes sense.
One of the interesting things I thought about this week that I noticed, and I think this has probably been done throughout the season, but it really sort of kind of captivated me this week, was these minutes of the show in which there were two scenes playing out, but they sort of spliced them together so we could see two things happening at the same time, whether it be kind of the dirty cops talking with Frank while Kingpin is executing Gallo, crushing his head, whether it's Buck going to try and kill Matt Murdock while Sheila and Gallo are talking about how he's going to try and, undo some of Fisk's power and that sort of thing. And even just kind of the way they staged the fight with Daredevil and the Punisher versus the dirty cops. It felt like it was almost two fights, because you were seeing one guy doing it one way and you saw the other guy doing it a completely different way. And it was just sort of these kind of juxtaposed, situations that are occurring at the same time. And you're kind of flashing back and forth between the two. I thought it was really well crafted the way they ended up using that technique specifically in this episode to just show, how things, comparing and contrasting two things that are going on kind of simultaneously.
Yep. No, that is, again, that was one of the things I found sort of stress inducing in some of the previous episodes by these guys, was they would cut back so much.
Yeah.
It was used a lot more effectively in this one, because the scenes you're talking about, I think they went back and forth. They still used their quick cuts to the advantage. I think that's something they like to do, but they weren't quite as quick, and it seemed like they didn't do it all the time. So it suddenly was more effective and didn't take me out of things the way it did some other times. So yeah. I would agree. I think that they seem to have found a nice happy medium in that case.
So as we're talking about some of those duel scenes, a lot of them had to do with Wilson Fisk and the Kingpin. You talked about him being a monster, in the open. Do you want to expound on that, Eddie? Is there anything more that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing to me about it is that Fisk himself obviously thinks he's kind of the hero of the story still. He believes he's helping the city somehow. But when you look at what he does, he becomes sort of like this cancer that just infects everyone about him, He is making this young guy, Daniel, the worst version of himself.
Yes.
He has taken Sheila, who had previously been sort of the one person on staff who was going, look, we can't do this because it's against the law, and turned her into someone who's now like, hey, I know you're going to kill this guy, but I'm going to give him to you just because, I don't know, evidently now I'm a sycophant for you as well. So
I don't know how that conversation got recorded, but man, it does seem like, based on the images that we saw, that she basically gave him up.
Yep,
And
she's a full-on villain at this point.
yeah.
You know, she got rid of everybody who isn't one of the loyalists. She got the commissioner killed. Heather, nice little psychologist lady, mind you. Her clientele is suspect. One of them's a serial killer, and the
Yeah.
other is the kingpin of crime. So, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how this has happened, but she's also now going into the orbit and being corrupted. Obviously, Vanessa, we think of the fact that evidently she was moving some stuff in and out of Red Hook, and maybe even before with her art, doing some of that in a tax-free way. But it seems almost certain that the Kingpin's influence has taken her to be the evilest version of herself as well. And one of the core stories of the year is the fact that Bullseye essentially would never have maybe become that guy if it hadn't been for Fisk sort of grooming and manipulating him to become his assassin, right? So part of this whole story is just that there is one rotten apple at the top of the big apple, and it's just infesting the entire city. And given time, he's just going to rot the entire city from the inside. And so that I think is fantastically interesting imagery in terms of Wilson Fisk is a well-developed character. They've spent a ton of time on him. You've gotten every chance to see all of the things that should make him sort of sympathetic from his childhood and all this, his love of his wife. And he's still just a dick, and you should hate him.
Yes.
Because when it comes right down to it, he's terrible. And he's terrible for other people,
It does sort of make this little hard to stomach given current events, if I do say so.
So this is in actual fact, I mean, one of my other points is that I have found this entire end part of the season especially difficult to watch, just because it's almost like, they've been producing this for years. And it's almost like everybody has known for years that there's a hack to the American government. That if you get the executive, you can somehow just use the privilege and power of that to simply corrupt or evacuate the entire branch and essentially just destroy the entire system.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, why we didn't fix this long ago is just astonishing, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the parallels to what's going on in America right now at the federal level are, it's almost so much that you wonder why you wonder almost that Disney dared to put this show out right now.
Yeah. They didn't have to go very far to find some material to base some of this stuff on. It does sort of feel like this is, ripped from the headlines, as they say on some of these shows.
Well, and it would have been, I mean, the story originally would have been written and started, keep in mind, during the first Trump administration. So Trump as president would have been a thing they already knew about when they were writing it the first time. And really, essentially, this script is a worst case scenario that I think everybody thought we'd escaped in January of 2021. And so that then they could safely do fiction on it. So how about you? What's another thing that you had that you wanted to talk about?
So I want to talk about the Safer Streets Initiative. This is the Powers Act by another name. This is pulled right from the Devil's Reign comics. Locking up vigilantes. That was what started that whole comic series. And I've been sort of waiting for it to happen.
Yep.
And I was sort of expecting it to have happened by now. And I can't necessarily say that I'm glad that it happened, but at the same time, I'm sort of kind of glad it happened because it makes where I think we end up potentially going in season 2 that much more interesting. I didn't read all of the Devil's Reign comics, so I don't know all the things that they could potentially do as a result of this. But I just thought the idea of Wilson Fisk becoming mayor of New York City and then outlawing vigilantism and sending out people to round up, you know, vigilantes and people he doesn't like under the guise of them being vigilantes, I think makes a lot of sense. And like I said, was just sort of expecting it to happen. And I love the fact that he basically blackmails the city council into going along with the idea. He declares martial law and a curfew and all this under the guise of, keeping everyone safe. And it's just like, no, that just allows you basically unchecked power. And that's what it is. It's not because he's trying to do anything other than just unchecked power. And I just, yeah, I was just, I guess I was happy to see it, but also I'm just like, I think it's a really interesting idea in a world where we have here, people with powers. I feel like those are the only people that can really stop Wilson Fisk. And so, what's the first thing, or one of the things that he's going to do right away, should be to try and limit the ability for those people to come at him.
Yeah. Although I'm going to be interested to see if in the end it's the people with powers that end up taking him down or the real people of the city. That there is a point at which the other thing is that it's easier to take down the Kingpin with powers than it is to take down the mayor. I mean, what really happens if they punch the mayor? How are they going to do anything about it? If he owns the police, if he owns the courts, big deal. They punch him and they bring him in front of the courts, and he's back in his office in 3 hours. So
right.
I think, and I don't know how this is going to work, but I suspect there's going to have to actually be a way that the people of the city kick his butt to the curb.
It does sort of seem that way, right? Because especially with the sort of monologue that Matt Murdock has at the end of this episode, he talks about
the fact
that he needs an army, but he also needs the city itself to sort of rise up. He in fact calls it the city without fear.
Yep.
Kind of taking on that moniker that he's had for so long. And it's the room he goes into when he talks about needing the army, it isn't Jessica Jones, it isn't Luke Cage, it isn't, Danny Rand, it isn't,
exactly
Echo, it is, it's Cherry, it is Josie, it is some random cops in uniform that haven't been corrupted by Wilson Fisk. It's
exactly
it's the other detective Kim that we've seen throughout the season.
That's what I think is going to have to happen. And I'd love to see the whole Defenders band get together and Jessica Jones, just punch the living crap out of Wilson Fisk and everything. But I don't know that that's actually going to be the effective solution. There's going to have to be something more like a populist uprising.
Yeah.
Almost, something that ends up being led by Matt Murdock more than Daredevil. And that, in some ways, I think would be the really interesting full turn of this, is that Kingpin forces him to realize that in actuality, he really is Daredevil, and he decides to be Daredevil to fight Fisk, but realizes in the end that really Matt Murdock is the guy who can seal the deal and take care of Fisk in a way that Daredevil actually can't.
Which is interesting because that's something that basically Cherry's been saying the entire season. He's been harping on him. Don't go back to that. You've got the brain. You've got the ability to affect change as Matt Murdock. And if he gets Kirsten on his side, because she's reading about the Red Hook Freeport at the end of the episode as well. I feel like we are going to get the Defenders, or at least some of them. I think it's all but confirmed that I can't think of her name, but the actress that played Jessica Jones is going to be in season 2. We don't know about necessarily any of the other defenders. I feel like, you know, there's going to be hopefully some defenders, but I also think, yeah, for what I think might be the most satisfying story is that it is kind of the real people of New York also assisting in taking down the kingpin.
Yep. Yeah, it's Kristen Ritter is the one who's been out
Yes.
talking, and
Yes.
she has got a new book out, and there's sent out some sort of Instagram post or something with Charlie Cox reading a copy of her book and the like. So they're still, hanging out. It's interesting how it seems those actors have bonded in the Marvel TV world, almost the same way a lot of the actors in the Marvel cinematic world ended up bonding together. And
Right.
so I would be unsurprised to see a number of them come back, but I think that it probably will be more of a mid-series thing than them being the ones that finish them off in the end.
Yeah.
But I would
Well, that
love it
makes
if we had 9 episodes of Luke Cage and Jessica Jones and Danny Rand and bring it on. New White
I
Tiger, Ms.
yeah,
Marvel.
yeah. We Angela Del Toro. We saw her at the end of the other thing. I want to see BB like expose him for being, the guy that killed her uncle and
Mhm.
the shady dealings that he's been doing and all this sort of thing.
Yep.
I hope she plays a role
That would
in
seem like a
taking him down
natural
as
fit
well.
as well.
Yeah,
Then
would be
Foggy, who's
yeah.
who's of course been given a super soldier serum to bring him back, appears in the final act and with his
I
new
do
superpowers.
I
Just
so I do have to ask about that. We've been going all season, and I know you've been rooting for Foggy Nelson to come back. That he was in witness relocation this whole time. That he wasn't actually dead. We didn't get that.
I don't really know. I mean, the problem is now year and a half, nobody's heard from him. The cases were all mostly done. And now we find out there's information he had that would have taken down, you know, um, the Fisks.
Risks, yeah.
So if he was alive, why wouldn't he have told someone this by now? And
Right.
so it's looking bad. I mean, we're going to need a scroll invasion with duplicates or something along this line to actually have Foggy back at this point. I'm I'm kind of pissed about this. I'm just going to not talk about it today though,
I
because I'm going to be
yeah.
positive because I really
I
did enjoy this episode.
Right. And no, to be perfectly frank, that you are not alone. There is a very vocal contingent on social media that I've seen that, have been talking about the fact that Augie's not dead. He's just in hiding. And I think there was a groundswell of people who were really hoping they would see that confirmed in this episode. And
Yep.
those people were left wanting when this episode came to.
Yeah, I'm not happy about that.
All right, Dan, I think that wraps up our main topics. Let's jump in and let's talk about the big question for the week.
All right. So Daredevil started a decade ago, right? Back in like
Yes.
2014. Had
Yes.
3 years. We had our Punisher show, all of this sort of stuff. And then it went into the long cold winter for about 3 or 4 years. And we started hearing there's going to be another show when they started filming it. The pandemic hit and writer strikes hit and everything. And basically it's been like 7 years since we last had Daredevil. Every other time this has happened, the show has ended up really disappointing. Because you talk about Arrested Development. When it came back, everybody's excited
Yeah.
about Arrested Development. Then we kind of wish that maybe they just left it at 3 seasons of Arrested Development, right? It's a long time to keep people's interest.
Dexter,
Yep.
I think some people weren't real happy with the revival of Twin Peaks. There's a
Yep.
bunch of shows like that we could talk about.
So that said, my big question for you is we've now watched nine episodes. We've got the first season. We get another one coming, but as far as you can tell, was it worth the wait?
Yeah, that is a tough question. It probably was not worth 7 years of wait. If I'm being perfectly honest, I think it might not have been worth that. I would have loved to have seen this a lot sooner. I'm not going to suggest to you that I didn't like the show and that I'm not actually rooting for next March, which apparently, according to the showrunners, is when we're going to see season 2 of Daredevil Born Again.
Mm-hmm.
But it just was so long, and like the expectations that I had going into it were astronomically high, and there were definitely things about the show, some of the pacing and stuff that I think just lent it to be a bit uneven and,
Yep.
and a little disappointing at times. And like the fact that, we just talked about it, the fact that they killed off a character that so many people loved. I feel like, if somebody was to say like, you can get Daredevil back, but we're gonna kill Foggy, would you like that? Which would you rather have? And so yeah, I feel like I'm just at it where it wasn't quite worth the wait. And maybe I will feel differently when we get a full season with this other creative team. Like I can't imagine that they necessarily found their footing immediately either. And what we got was this sort of kind of hodgepodge of sort of kinetic craziness, and then we had the slow burn of the original show, and then we get this kinetic craziness again at the end. I think they've set up the story better for where they could go in season 2, and then I'll also have some realistic expectations because I'll only have to wait a year. So my initial thought was no, it wasn't necessarily worth it. What do you think? Do you think it was worth it?
Interesting. And you are our unrelentingly positive Foggy Nelson type persona here on the show.
I am, and so this
kind of
this
feels
a little weird. I'm not gonna lie. It feels a little weird.
You told me you had a nuanced take, and I think you're right that is where you're at makes perfect sense to me. And it is hard for something to be worth a 7-year wait. Now, the nice thing is that basically the way that Disney gutted the Daredevil and all the other shows, it's not like we were sitting there expecting anything for a lot of this. There were at least 4 of those years, 5 maybe, where it was just like, yeah, this is done. We're never seeing these guys again. Despite people definitely wanting it. So I'm gonna say that I can't believe that it's as good as it is, considering how long.
Yes, that I will agree with you.
We had to wait 7 years. The morons killed off the best character on the show in the first episode, coming back, which just handicaps you badly. Yes. And this is a show that had a really nice run and finished a bunch of things up. And then you had things like the Kingpin, where they just sort of messed around with him in different ways. You had Daredevil going off into She-Hulk and being used in a different context and sort of a different, what do you call it? A different kind of feel as far as the show.
Right.
And then they came back, and it took them a few episodes, and they got everything sorted out. And I don't like that they seem to be glorying in almost like this middle school, look how much blood I can make on my art drawing type of thing. But I will say that the last 2 episodes have been as good, I think, as a lot of the actual Daredevil TV shows from the original. Especially this last episode, I would say would hold up with just about anything the previous one. And so, if like you said, it takes a while to maybe get things sorted out and to get things back, and they change creative crews and everything. Um, we shouldn't have had to wait this long. Disney should have gotten their stuff together and just realized, hey, we've got a really good thing going. Let's just move it from Netflix to these to Disney and keep going. And we
Yeah.
should be on Daredevil season 9 right now or whatever. But
Yes.
that said, I had fully expected to believe it was not worth it. And now I'm like, I am ready for I'm ready for 9 more episodes. Count me in for spring of 2026.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I will say this. Seeing Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio and John Bernthal as those characters again, almost by itself could have made it worth the wait. Just I love how well each of those portrays their characters. I mean, Deborah Ann Woll as Karen, I think, is fantastic as well, and Wilson Bethel as Benjamin Poindexter. They had all these really great actors and actresses playing these really great roles, and they seem to know them really, really well. And
yeah.
I love the fact that they seem excited about what they're doing going forward too. And so, like, if there's any reason for me to think, to get excited about the next season and what might come after that, I mean, just seeing how excited they are, I think is definitely getting me there.
That is one of the coolest things is that there are 3 people in this show who have taken complete and utter ownership of their characters and their careers through their characters. D'Onofrio appears to just love playing the Kingpin, and he's played a lot of characters over the years.
Yes.
There was a show he did, Criminal Intent, Law and Order Criminal Intent. I absolutely loved him in that show.
Yes,
right?
I did too.
I thought that would be his defining role, and I think he probably did as well. But it's not. Kingpin is now his defining role,
Yeah.
and Charlie Cox has bought into everything Daredevil and sort of managing that character and the like. And then you've got Barenthal just going over the wall with the Punisher and sort of becoming his advocate in everything and playing it perfectly, And then there's all these other people too who are obviously great characters. Deborah Ann Woll has done a great job for years now. Of course, have our man Foggy, and it would be great if somehow or another Eldon Henson would make it back. We'll see. But I think that really that idea that D'Onofrio, Cox, and Barenthal have sort of made it their mission to make sure that this stuff is as good as possible has made a huge difference. I actually, when I was hearing about them sort of meddling early, where they were going to Feige and like, hey, we need to change this. Oh, this is a recipe for disaster. But in actual fact, sometimes these guys, they're professionals and they've been doing it, and they really do know.
They're stewards for these characters now. Yep. They feel like they have that almost as much ownership as maybe Stan Lee has at the characters.
Yep. It's kind of like one of my favorite characters, Hercule Poirot. The character was written by Agatha Christie, but now there's been the same guy playing him on the BBC for the better part of like 30 or 40 years. So because of that, David Suchet has become almost a co-author of Poirot in the modern sense, and he is very much protective of the character and the legacy. So, yeah, I like it.
That's a great big question. I would love to get the thoughts of our listeners. Do you think it was worth the wait? No wrong answers here. I'm very curious to see if where people fall on this, because it's 7 years is a long time, but we ended up getting a product that was better than I think we could have reasonably guessed we would get based on everything that has happened during that time that we heard about, and maybe even some of the things we didn't hear about.
Yep. Yeah, not only the wait, but then all of the craziness once they actually did start it. you would have figured would have completely doomed it. Because usually reshoots and firings of directors and stuff, that's, morbid time type of outcomes in general.
or the still waiting to be made Blade movie.
Yep, exactly. So we are very fortunate because it could have obviously gone a lot worse. Because that would be another question. If they had stuck with the original direction, how do you think this would be going right now?
I feel like there'd be a lot of people that were not real thrilled with it. I think there were definitely some things about those like episodes 2 through 7 that I liked, but also some real rough things about that those episodes. And I think the reception on the show would be a lot more measured, and I think there'd be people that liked it, and I think maybe I would be, in say I would enjoy it and thought it was pretty solid, but I wouldn't be as like excited for another season as I think I am right now.
Yep.
Season 2.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is it would have been almost like seems like more of a slower paced courtroom drama type of thing is what we would have been getting for most of the year. I don't know how that would have went.
That's not bad necessarily. It just isn't necessarily what I sign up for when I sign up for
Daredevil. Because we know after all these years, the last thing you have to worry about with lawyer Matt Murdock is any actual lawyering, because that happens
yes.
almost not at all in any of the comics. So
makes his token appearance in a courtroom like once or twice a year. That's really all you have to worry about.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right, Dan, I think that wraps up our review for Daredevil Born Again, season 1. We've covered all the episodes individually, kind of did a little wrap up here with the big question. So going from here, we're going to jump back into our comic book review for Daredevil, the comics in volume 2. I believe we're going to be jumping into 2002, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely. That sounds good. It's going to be fun. Looking forward to getting into the 2000s a little farther, seeing what's going on. It is interesting and very different. Very different.
We're gonna get to pick up with some of the Brian Michael Bendis books again, who was one of the executive producers on the TV show, or at least the season premiere, I think he was. But yeah, there's a lot more Daredevil story on the comic book side that we have to look forward to, as we now have to wait almost a year until we could get some more episodes.
Long time.
TV show.
Long time. All right. That should be about it.
Yeah. So we'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. If you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That will help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. Tell us what you think. Was it worth the wait? What did you like? What didn't you like about the finale? And what are you maybe looking forward to in season 2? You can send us those comments via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com. Or you can reach out to us via social media. On Blue Sky, we are at Comics Overtime there. And we're back to our regular schedule. We're going to be shifting our releases back to Wednesday like we were doing previously. And then we just have to wait a year until we get new episodes of Born Again.
Yep. It's a little bit of a wait, but that's okay. That's the way of it.
We've waited longer, right?
Yeah. 1 year is better than 7. So yeah, good times though. Overall, some things I wish would have gone differently, but I think it's been an entertaining year, and it's good to see your characters make it into the greater world and be treated with some respect and some dignity. And I think we can definitely say that the show has been doing that.
Would agree wholeheartedly.
For everyone except Foggy, who's obviously getting screwed.
Yes, definitely. And on that note, until next week, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.